Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion of unemployment. Of course, this is our third and final chapter or lecture on the data of macroeconomics. We talked about GDP and how it measures production or income. We talked about the CPI and how it captures the cost of living and how that's changing. And now we're talking about the unemployment rate. Of course, the unemployment rate is of vital importance in macroeconomics. It's something that we talk about all the time. It's very hard to really have a discussion around the macroeconomy for even a minute without talking about unemployment. It's a key indicator. It's especially important right now because unemployment is so high. Just as a little precursor of where we're going, if you go back to January, February, unemployment nationally was 3-point-something%. But now, given this crisis, given everything that's going on, unemployment jumped up. For the May reading, unemployment jumped up to 14-point-something%. And then just last week on Friday, unemployment actually fell a little bit, but it's still 13-point-something%. And 13-point-something% is a really high rate. It's still one of the highest rates that we've seen since the 1930s. So unemployment is a real issue in our economy right now. Let's get on with the screen share. I have a PowerPoint for this, unemployment. One of the key factors that we'll talk about in this chapter is this fact. I mean, there are always at least several million people in the U.S. who are unemployed. Even in good times, even if you go back to January, when unemployment was 3-point-something%, there were still several million people unemployed in the U.S. Now unemployment is much higher than that because obviously we're in an economic crisis and a lot of businesses are shut down, et cetera, et cetera. Well, WVU, for example, has 875 people on furlough right now. Just as an example, contributing to unemployment. But anyway, even in good times, there are still several million people who are unemployed. So that's something that we'll kind of pay attention to trying to understand during this chapter. Before we get to that, just the basic statistics. First and foremost, we have this corresponding statistic called the labor force participation rate. Labor force participation rate is really our first, and it's our more fundamental statistic when we're talking about the labor market. Labor force participation captures, among your entire adult population, how many people want to work in the first place. Don't even worry for now about whether they have a job or whether they're just looking for a job or wanting to have a job, just how many people want to work in the first place. Now, nationally, I will say labor force participation is about 63 or 64%. About 63-64% of the adults in the country want to work. And just as a quick aside, before we really move on to go on a tangent, labor force participation is one of the biggest problems in West Virginia. In West Virginia, we come in about 9 percentage points below the nation. Labor force participation nationally, I think it's 63% nationally. We come in at 54%. Only about 54% of the adults in West Virginia want to work. That's the lowest rate of labor force participation among the 50 states, and it's a real big problem for our state. When I give speeches about the state economy, I'm constantly talking about we have a low rate of labor force participation. This is a major impediment to economic development. We have to find ways to get more people into the labor force. But anyway, that's your first statistic. What share of the adult population wants to work in the first place? Now the labor force is defined as the number of people who are employed plus the number who are unemployed. But to be unemployed, you have to be actively looking for work. You're not unemployed if you don't want to work. If you're retired, if you're in school, if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, that's not counted as unemployed. To be unemployed, you have to be, looking for work. You have to be wanting to work. So the labor force is everybody in the economy who's ready, willing, and able to work. Then that group is divided into those who actually have jobs and those who are just actively looking for work. Then the unemployment rate is the number unemployed divided by the labor force. Right now, unemployment in the U.S. is about 13-point-something%. So 13-14% of everyone who wants to work in the country isn't able to find a job. They're looking. These are some old statistics on the economy. I need to get this updated. You can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website and just browse for 2 minutes, and you can easily find the current statistics to characterize the economy today. But there you see kind of the way the numbers stacked out a few years ago, the number employed, the number unemployed. and those people in the US who are not in the labor force. And then you can just kind of follow these statistics to just see how the calculation is done. Of course, I'm sure I'll give you a quiz question where I require you to just do a simple unemployment rate calculation, but the formulas are right there and it's really simple. Just labor force participation rate, share of the adult population who wants to work, labor force divided by adult population, unemployment rate, number unemployed divided by labor force. Simple as that. There's those other statistics, or those other kind of definitions or examples of calculating the statistics. Here you see how the unemployment rate has moved over time. This figure only starts in 1960, but if you look back to the Great Depression, unemployment peaked at around 25% during the Great Depression. Statistics aren't as good back then, but according to the estimates of economic historians, we had about 25% unemployment during the Great Depression. And here you can see these movements with the business cycle, right? I mean, the business cycle is defined by GDP, but this movement in unemployment moves with the business cycle as well, to a very large extent. So you can kind of get a sense of the nature of the business cycle by looking at this. But there you see the unemployment rate. We had this really bad recession in 1983 nationally, and unemployment peaked up here at about 10 point something percent. And then during the Great Recession in 08, 09, unemployment peaked at almost exactly 10%. Unemployment improved gradually, and it got down to a really, really low level 2 or 3 years ago, down to 3 point something percent. But then in the last 2 months, unemployment has spiked up to 13, 14%. So actually right now, if we were to rescale this figure, or if we were to update this figure as we should to capture the current rate, unemployment would actually be off the chart. This figure is capped at 12%, so we'd have to go up 2 more percentage points to get the current unemployment rate. It's so high. We've had such a shock to the system because of this pandemic. Really interestingly, there's a whole bunch of labor force statistics we could look at if we wanted to, but here you can see the labor force participation rate by gender. You can see for male and female, you can see how labor force participation has evolved over time. It's interesting. We had that big, tremendous rise in female labor force participation from about 1950 up to about 1995, but ever since then it's leveled off. And over that time, male labor force participation has fallen a little bit gradually, but you can see the huge rise in female labor force participation, and that was a real boost to our economy for several decades while that was happening. I alluded to this already. It's interesting to look at these unemployment statistics, right? I mean, if you're a nerd, if you like economics, like myself, just go to the BLS website, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and just look around a little bit at these national statistics that just lay out, the labor force, unemployment rate, labor force participation rate. Look at how those figures have evolved over time, and look at how those figures vary across groups. I just showed you kind of one example of how the figures vary across gender, but they vary across a lot of other demographic or socioeconomic groups, and that's, of course, an important part of the whole picture. For example, teenage unemployment. We actually have an unemployment rate specifically for people who are 16, 17, 18, and 19 years old, and it's really high. That's the highest rate of unemployment. And that's you can kind of see a lot of important facts about America and what's going on in America. You can see some of those facts embedded in the unemployment statistics. Now we have different types of unemployment. Now you don't see this in the data. If you just go to the data, you'll see the unemployment rate, period, end of story. But implicit within that, we have the different types of unemployment. And first is frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is very straightforward, very mundane. Frictional unemployment is unemployment that arises when people are moving between jobs. So suppose you graduate college, you're not working, you're just a student, you graduate college and you immediately start looking for work at graduation. All of a sudden you become unemployed, right? You joined the labor force at that time. You didn't previously have a job. You became unemployed when you graduate and start looking for work, you actually increase the unemployment rate because you weren't in the labor force before. Now you join, you don't have a job immediately, so the unemployment rate goes up. If it takes you 3 months to find a job, then, well, you're not really between jobs, but in some sense you can think of it as though you're between jobs. You're between school and a job. That's an example of frictional unemployment. It's just natural, normal kind of unemployment in the economy. You might just simply move. You might get tired of cold, rainy West Virginia weather. You might move to Arizona. If it takes a little time for you to find a job when you get to Arizona, then that kind of waiting period until you find a job that suits you, that's unemployment. That's frictional unemployment. Unemployment is just simply the time that it takes for people to normally find a job that matches their skills when people are moving between jobs. Does that make sense? Frictional unemployment is really straightforward, really simple. It's kind of natural unemployment that's always going to occur in an economy. Now, structural unemployment occurs because there's not enough jobs in a particular labor market. So you can think of shifts that occur when technology changes. The example that I have in here, do you all even know what typewriters are? I mean, a typewriter is a really old school thing now, but I still have in my notes the example of a typewriter repair person. You know, used to we had typewriters, and used to there were people who worked on repairing typewriters. But when typewriters disappeared decades ago, those jobs disappeared, and some people in that industry became unemployed. It wasn't anything weird or bad or messed up. That just happens. That's life. As technology is improving, as we're moving forward, as we have a dynamic economy, we're going to have what we call sectoral shifts. There's two examples here. Let me back up. Don't talk about sectoral shifts yet. We're just going to have people who are displaced from their jobs as the economy evolves. A typewriter repair person is a perfect example of that. There's examples of revolts in England in the 1800s with people who worked in like weaving, and these machines came along and they weaved cloth much better. Then the old people who were weaving by hand got mad, and they had riots and stuff like that because they were being put out of work because of the machines coming in. That's just normal. That just happens in the economy. It's not good for the individual. Don't get me wrong. It can be problematic for the individual, and we can talk about how to address this on an individual basis, but it doesn't mean the economy's sour or the economy's gone bad in some way. Technological progress and other evolution of the economy can put people out of work as their skills become outdated as the economy moves. We can also have sectoral shifts. Over time, our economy just evolves. The example I have in here is shift from manufacturing, mechanical goods to pharmaceuticals. Right now, we spend more effort on pharmaceuticals. Years ago, we had more manufacturing jobs. As those sectoral shifts occur, which is a natural, normal thing to happen in the economy, as those shifts occur, then some people are going to get kind of caught up in that and are going to lose their job as the transition occurs. It's not good for the individual, it's a problem, but for the economy as a whole, it's a normal thing that happens. Another example is the minimum wage example. We talked about minimum wage before. We talked about that just recently in chapter 4. We showed how if we have that minimum wage, then the quantity demanded for low-skilled labor is less than the quantity supplied. We're going to have an excess supply or a surplus of labor. In the context of the labor market, that surplus is unemployment. It's just the nature of that labor market, the nature of the low-skilled labor market, which is where the minimum wage would be relevant, right? The minimum wage isn't relevant to the market for brain surgeons, right, where they're making $300,000 a year or something like that. Minimum wage is relevant to the low-skilled labor market. Unemployment just exists in the low-skilled labor market because of the minimum wage creating that rigidity, not allowing the market to reach an equilibrium where quantity demanded is just equal to quantity supplied. Structural unemployment occurs in particular labor markets because there's just not enough jobs in that particular labor market. It can happen because of minimum wages in low-skilled labor. It can happen because of sectoral shifts as the economy evolves. It can happen as technology changes and displaces people from jobs. Structural unemployment, again, to be very clear, it's bad for the individual. I don't want to sound callous or anything like that. It's bad for the individual, but it just happens normally in an economy. Institutional unemployment is unemployment that arises because of institutional benefits associated with unemployment. We have unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance has just been enhanced recently during this crisis as a result of the CARES Act. But normally, traditionally, unemployment insurance would give you 50% of your previous wages up to a certain threshold, and it would last for 26 weeks, for half of a year. Suppose, and to be unemployed, you're supposed to be actively looking for work, right? You're not supposed to be able to receive unemployment insurance benefits unless you're looking for work. But suppose you've been unemployed for a month. Suppose you got legitimately laid off for some reason. After a month, suppose you kind of find, okay, I think I'm going to be able to get a job over here. I think I have a new opportunity ahead. I mean, it's possible that someone could extend their spell of unemployment kind of artificially in some ways because of the benefits that unemployment insurance carries with it. You're not making you're only making 50% of your income up to that certain threshold, but you have a lot of leisure time, and maybe you enjoy this leisure time, and maybe you have a few things that you like to get done for a couple months before you start working again. Well, the extra time that that a spell of unemployment is extended because of those benefits allow you to do that and to enjoy your extra time, that's called institutional unemployment. Again, that just happens in an economy. It's not good, but it's just happened. Anytime we have unemployment insurance benefits and other benefits that come with unemployment, it's natural to imagine that we're going to have institutional unemployment. Anyway, these first three types of unemployment, frictional, structural, and institutional, form what we call the natural rate of unemployment. Those types of unemployment, again, can be bad for the individual, but they're normal. They just happen. They just exist even in a good economy. We believe the natural rate of unemployment is about 5% in the U.S. economy, maybe a little bit less than that, but let's go with 5%. We think that because the nature of our economy, because of the dynamism in our economy, and because of other characteristics of our economy, we think that even in good times, when the economy is doing well, we think we're still going to have about 5% of the people unemployed for those natural reasons, due to friction as people are moving between jobs, because of structural problems in specific labor markets, and because of institutional unemployment. Those three types of unemployment together form what we call the natural rate, the normal rate of unemployment that we expect in the economy. And then the last kind of unemployment, which is what we're really focused on, right? The natural rate of unemployment, it's not good. I mean, it would be great if we could reduce it, but the natural rate of unemployment is with us for the long run. It takes long run major policies to reduce the natural rate over the course of years and years. But what we're really going to focus on in this course is cyclical unemployment, unemployment that's associated with the business cycle. So when we go into recession, a bunch of people lose their jobs, unemployment rises above what is normal. It's that additional unemployment that comes above the natural rate in a recession. That's the unemployment we're worried about. That's the unemployment that we want to eliminate or avoid with the macroeconomic policies that we're going to discuss later in the course. So right now, unemployment, I did not look up the exact rate before started this lecture. I think it might be 13.7%. It was just in the news on Friday, but I don't remember the exact number. I think it was 13.7%. I know for a fact it's 13 point something percent. Let's just say 13.5 to have kind of semi-round numbers. We believe the natural rate's about 5%, but we're observing a rate of about 13.5%. All we observe is the 13.5%. The 5% figure is something that economists have estimated based on research. but all we observe is 13.5. So we deduce from that, if we have 5% natural unemployment, the difference, the 8.5%, is cyclical unemployment. The 8.5% is unemployment that we're observing because the economy has turned sour. Does that make sense? Cyclical unemployment is fluctuations in unemployment around the natural rate. Almost always with cyclical unemployment, we're talking about positive cyclical unemployment, unemployment that's too high, unemployment that's above the natural rate. Although, I will just point out before we go on, I will point out that unemployment can be unusually low during periods. As a matter of fact, over the past couple of years, we've had a really strong economy. The economy's been doing well, and unemployment has actually been lower than what you would expect. Again, as I said before, unemployment was down in the 3-point-something% range as recently as the first of this year, and that actually carried with it negative cyclical unemployment. We had kind of an overheated economy in some sense, and unemployment was a little bit less than even what is normal. But that's a rare thing. That's very rare. For us to have unemployment, significantly below 5% only happens once in a while. It happened in the late 60s. It happened in the late 90s. And again, it happened here just recently over the past couple of years, but it doesn't happen very often. Maybe one time every couple of decades is about what we're seeing. But normally, cyclical unemployment is what you need to know about. That's unemployment. It's technically fluctuations in unemployment around the natural rate, but it's always unemployment in addition to the natural rate. Like right now, we're looking at 8 or 9% cyclical unemployment right now with the economy that we see today. Quick note. Oh, I lost it. Unemployment is counter-cyclical. We talked before about how we have the business cycle as defined by GDP, and then we have inflation, which tends to be pro-cyclical. Not always, but it's usually pro-cyclical. But then we have unemployment, which is counter-cyclical. So unemployment is high at the trough of the business cycle, right? Unemployment is rising when the economy is going down, when the economy is going to a recession. Unemployment is high at the trough of the business cycle. And then when the economy is improving, unemployment is falling. And then unemployment is very low at the peak of the business cycle. So you just imagine that business cycle. Unemployment is counter-cyclical. It moves against that. The peak of the business cycle, unemployment is low. The trough of the business cycle, unemployment is high. That's intuitive. That's not a weird idea, but I just want you to know that term, counter-cyclical. Same thing before. The unemployment rate has problems with it. All these statistics have problems. Virtually any statistic you look at is imperfect, and it's always, statistics can be very useful and valuable, but it's still always important to understand the problems that statistics carry with them. The first problem here is underemployment. The unemployment rate just captures, do you have a job or not? But if somebody wants to work 40 hours a week, but if they can only find a job that gives them 20 hours a week, then that's kind of like they're half unemployed, right? That's what we call underemployment. If you're only working 20 hours a week, you're half unemployed, if you want to work full time. But the unemployment rate just simply doesn't capture that. It just says, do you have a job or not? It does not capture underemployment. And then the more important problem, the bigger problem, is discouraged workers, the discouraged worker phenomenon. So here's the idea. You lose your job, and month 1, month 2, month 3, you're fine, you still have confidence, you still have energy, you're looking for new work. You're unemployed, you're officially counted as unemployed because you're actively looking for work. But suppose you're 63 years old, and it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you just can't find a job. It's entirely possible that you could just get so discouraged that you just give up looking for work. You just retire early. You don't want to do that. That's not your first choice. You want to work still, but you become so discouraged that you just give up looking for work. Well, based on what we said before, when you give up looking for work, when you leave the labor force, you're no longer counted as unemployed, and that actually reduces the unemployment rate, right? If you get so discouraged that you quit looking for work, then the unemployment rate actually falls. So that's backwards, right? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that, the unemployment rate's falling because people are getting so discouraged. That's, the unemployment rate indicates things are getting better, even though, if anything, things are getting worse if people are getting all this discouragement. So the discouraged worker phenomenon is a real problem with the unemployment rate. If you look back during the Great Recession, go back 10 years, again, as I said before in that figure, unemployment peaked right at 10% during the Great Recession. Now, we have estimates out there that actually try to capture the discouraged worker phenomenon. Those estimates indicate that unemployment at that time, that true unemployment was as high as 17% when the actual measured unemployment rate said 10%. That's how big of a deal the discouraged worker phenomenon can be, right? It's not as big of a deal when the economy's good, but when the economy gets worse, the discouraged worker phenomenon becomes more and more important. And so in those cases, the unemployment rate really understates the severity of the true situation, right? 10 years ago, unemployment said 10%, unemployment rate said 10%. The real situation was probably more like 16 or 17% when you account for discouraged workers. Oddly enough, you can find instances where the discouraged worker phenomenon works in reverse. You'll have months, if you read the Wall Street Journal every month, which I have been reading the Wall Street Journal every month for at least 20 years, you'll find instances where we have like good months, right? When the economy is growing, when the economy is improving, coming out of recessions. If you look at the 2001 recession, if you look at the 2008, 2009 recession, you'll see months where the economy is improving, doing well, but the unemployment rate rises. And what that is the discouraged worker phenomenon in reverse. You see people who've kind of fallen by the wayside and people who have left the labor force, they start seeing good news about the economy's growing, people are hiring, the economy's moving in the right direction, and they'll actually come into the labor force and start looking for work again. That's the discouraged worker phenomenon working in reverse. And if they can't find jobs immediately, which, they're probably not going to find jobs immediately, then that causes the unemployment rate to rise, even though the economy is doing well. But it's easily explained, it's easily understood if you think about the discouraged worker phenomenon. Make sense? And the last point I want to say, I said this before, but this when we think about public policy towards unemployment, you have this efficiency versus equity trade-off. Okay, you see it on my screen there. That's all there is to it. I'm going to stop the screen share, but we have this efficiency versus equity trade-off. Think about unemployment insurance. We all pay into unemployment insurance when we work. We pay premiums into it. And then we have this kind of pool of unemployment insurance money there in some sense. And, when we lose our jobs, if we lose our jobs for a legitimate reason, if we're laid off because the economy is weak or whatever, then we can get up to 50% of our earnings, and it can last for 26 weeks. Again, it's been made more generous recently with the CARES Act that was passed back in April. But the CARES Act is going to expire and it's going to go back to the traditional setup. Why do we have unemployment insurance? Right? I hope that's obvious, right? I mean, we have unemployment insurance to keep people from falling into poverty, to give people some cushion, to give people some comfort during a spell of unemployment when they find themselves between jobs. You could say that we give people unemployment insurance for equity reasons, to have more of a fair income distribution, to help people out between jobs so they don't kind of fall into poverty or fall through the cracks or really wind up in trouble. We have unemployment insurance for equity. But why don't we have unemployment insurance that is 100% of your previous income. And why do we stop it at 26 weeks? Why doesn't it go for a full year? Why doesn't it go for 2 years? Why does it go for 5 years? Well, the reason is, if we made unemployment insurance 100% of your previous earnings, and if it went for, an infinite amount of time, then we'd find that everybody's all of a sudden unemployed. People would be finding ways to get laid off, and they would just live off of unemployment and just enjoy their time. You can't make unemployment insurance too generous, or else that will really distort people's incentives to look for work. So at the same time, you can't make it not generous enough, because that's unfair or unjust or inequitable. That's bad. But at the same time, you can't make it too generous either, or you'll have inefficiencies. Right? We have this labor resource in our economy, right? Labor is one of the key fundamental factors of production. If you have an unemployment insurance system that's too generous, you'll have too many people unemployed. People will be taking advantage of that. You'll have too much unemployed, and it'll create inefficiencies. So we have this equity versus efficiency trade-off, and we have to find the right balance on that spectrum. We can't be too generous, but at the same time, we want to be generous enough because we want to help people, and we want to have a strong society and a healthy society. And so it's up to kind of politicians in some sense to find the right balance, right? How generous should it be? Not too much, not too little. And there's no absolute answer to that, right? Economists can inform that question, and economists can help you think about that question, but there's no absolute answer on, how generous unemployment insurance should be, right? That reflects to some extent our values, and it's up to the political system to make that determination through kind of informed opinion, which is what an economist would provide. But the value judgment goes beyond economic science and, gets to kind of your philosophical beliefs. So anyway, I wanted to point that out. Anytime we talk about unemployment insurance, it's a good example to illustrate that equity versus efficiency trade-off. And that comes up a lot in public policy. It's not just in unemployment insurance. There's a lot of examples where that comes up, and it's important to kind of understand that and understand the balance that we're trying to strike. Well, that's it. We'll be back next time. Now we're finished talking about the data. We'll be back next time to talk about the economy in the long run and the real drivers of economic growth in the long run. All right, talk to you soon.